From those gleaming skyscrapers you see downtown to the very roads you drive on every day, the civil construction industry quite literally shapes our world.
It really does. It's fundamental.
But its foundations, well, they're vulnerable to forces far beyond the blueprint. Forces like, the simmering conflict between Iran and Israel.
Right. And it feels distant, but it's not.
Exactly. This isn't some abstract political issue happening over there. It's like a seismic event, sending these immediate shockwaves right through global supply chains, project budgets.
And the people, the workforce itself.
Absolutely. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the profound and sometimes really surprising impacts of this geopolitical tension on global civil construction.
It's complex stuff.
It really is striking how interconnected everything is. And that's our mission here today with this deep dive.
Yeah, to cut through the noise.
To extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, help you get well-informed quickly.
And make sense of it all.
So we'll break down these complex impacts into 5 sort of critical dimensions.
Okay. We've got supply chain disruptions, economic sanctions, infrastructure development challenges, human resource implications, and then the long-term industry outlook.
A pretty comprehensive look.
Let's start building this analysis.
Sounds good.
So the ripple effects, they begin almost immediately with the very materials we build with. Let's talk supply chain disruptions.
The absolute starting point.
Think about materials delivery. I mean, that's construction's lifeblood, right?
Totally essential.
And right now, it's under direct threat from these geopolitical tensions. You see these immediate vulnerabilities in, critical shipping routes.
Yeah, the maritime routes are key here.
We're talking the Strait of Hormuz, 20-30% of global seaborne oil passes through there?
An incredible amount. And then there's the Red Sea and the Suez Canal.
Handles about 12% of global trade. And we've already seen the Houthi attacks, often linked to Iran.
Forcing ships the long way around Africa.
Exactly. Vastly longer journeys.
And it's not just a minor detour, is it? It's a fundamental reroute with real consequences. Big time. S&P Global data, it paints a pretty clear picture. Rerouting adds, 10 to 15 days to transit times? And slaps on an extra 15 to 30% in cost for Asia-Europe shipping.
Wow. 15 to 30%.
That's a direct hit.
Yeah.
Not just to project timelines, but, straight to the bottom line.
Affecting every single construction project globally, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
And this next point, it really amplifies the impact.
Yeah.
These disruptions hit key construction inputs hard.
The basic building blocks.
Yeah, imagine the ripple for things like oil, vital for asphalt, fuel, plastics, or steel, which is everywhere, right? Rebar, structural components.
Can't build much without steel.
Even cement and various chemicals feel the squeeze. The CRU group reported that during the peak Red Sea crisis,
Yeah, I saw that report.
European rebar prices surged a painful 10-15% just in Q1 2024.
All because Turkish imports got delayed. It shows how fragile it is.
It really does.
And, a critical observation here is how the whole just-in-time model.
Oh yeah, the efficiency model. Exactly. The modern construction has leaned on so heavily for efficiency, it suddenly becomes, just too late during these geopolitical shocks.
Right, just too late. I like that.
Think about it. A single specialized component, maybe it's a bespoke HVAC system or a custom prefab element. If that one thing gets delayed, you can bring an entire project phase to a grinding halt.
Everything stops.
This isn't just a small delay. It's kind of a death knell for that classic just-in-time thinking in these situations.
So what's the alternative?
Well, the new reality might be just in case. Stockpiling critical items maybe isn't optional anymore. It's like a non-negotiable insurance policy against these shocks.
Makes sense. And it's not just the materials or their delayed arrival. The cost of actually getting them there has skyrocketed.
The insurance costs, yeah.
The Lloyd's Market Association found that war risk premiums for Red Sea transit jumped, get this, an astounding 500 to 1,000% at the height of tensions.
500 to 1,000%, just staggering.
That's a massive sort of unseen cost baked into every single shipment.
Absolutely. It all adds up.
Then, okay, beyond these visible blockades on trade routes, there's another barrier, more insidious maybe, the invisible wall of economic sanctions.
Right. This is a whole other layer of complexity.
Sanctions, mainly against Iran, create these incredibly complex compliance hurdles and market distortions, too, for the whole industry.
That's right. You got the direct material bans first, restrictions on importing certain construction materials from Iran.
Like what kind of materials?
Things like specific types of cement, tiles, petrochemicals maybe. And then the flip side, Exporting sophisticated construction equipment to Iran is also heavily restricted.
Hmm.
The Iran Cement Association, for instance, they noted Iran's cement export volume just plummeted, over 70% in 5 years following those 2018 U.S. sanctions.
70%. That's a huge chunk of their market gone. A stark example of market exclusion, really.
Definitely.
But it gets even trickier, right, with secondary sanctions.
Oh, absolutely. That's where it gets really complicated for global companies.
Companies worldwide face penalties for, sometimes unknowingly, dealing with sanctioned Iranian entities hidden deep within supply chains.
Yeah, like raw material suppliers, maybe even subcontractors you didn't know were connected.
Which means you need incredibly rigorous due diligence. And that costs money.
A lot of money. A global risk management firm report highlighted that compliance costs for major contractors shot up 20–30% over the past 3 years.
Wow.
And a big chunk of that is down to this kind of geopolitical risk screening.
So if compliance costs are soaring 20–30%, like you said, for a smaller or medium-sized contractor, is this just becoming an insurmountable barrier? Like, can they even play in certain markets now?
That's precisely the challenge. It raises the barrier to entry significantly. The broader takeaway here is that sanctions effectively, well, they split global markets.
Fragment them.
Exactly. It forces contractors to navigate these separate, often incompatible supply chains, which naturally just kills any economies of scale you might have had.
Yeah.
And it's not just about materials. Think about financing. Banks become extremely cautious.
Understandably.
They're hesitant to finance any projects that are perceived to have even a remote connection to Iran.
So that drives up capital costs?
Dramatically.
Yeah.
Increases complexity for vital regional developments. It's basically a risk premium, but applied globally due to these sanctions.
Okay, so it's not just the flow of materials or capital that's hit. The very act of building, developing new infrastructure becomes this high-stakes gamble in regions caught in the crosshairs.
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly to the infrastructure development challenges.
Yeah.
Projects right in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
The direct project risk is, well, it's substantial. In areas like Israel, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, maybe even some Gulf states, projects face the threat of actual physical destruction from attacks, but also chronic delays due to security alerts, forced evacuations,
Constant disruption.
and critically, a diversion of national resources towards defense instead of building.
That makes sense.
The World Bank actually estimates reconstruction costs in conflict zones are typically 30–50% higher than standard projects.
30–50% higher? Why so much?
A lot of it is down to security and those risk premiums we talked about. You're essentially paying for guards almost as much as you're paying for girders.
Paying for guards as much as girders. That paints a picture. So that heightened risk, it must have a chilling effect on investment overall, right?
Oh, definitely. It deters private capital, for sure. And it delays government spending on infrastructure that's maybe seen as non-essential at that moment.
So the money flows elsewhere.
Capital rushes towards markets perceived as safer. We've actually seen several major public-private partnership PPP infrastructure projects in the wider region put on hold indefinitely.
Just shelved.
Yeah. Investors simply demand significantly higher returns to compensate for that perceived political risk.
That's certainly true for big-ticket private investments. But what about public sector projects? I mean, aren't governments in affected regions still kind of mandated to build, even if it means diverting resources?
You're right to ask about the public sector. Yes, they have obligations. But the reality is, when facing security threats, governments often do reallocate budgets. Money moves from infrastructure development to defense spending or emergency repairs.
Is there data on that?
Yeah, the OECD estimates that a 10% increase in military spending correlates with roughly a 2–4% decrease in public infrastructure investment in those affected regions.
So roads don't get built, hospitals wait.
Because tanks are needed now. And of course, any projects that do proceed, they incur massive additional security costs.
Right, back to the guards and girders.
Guards, surveillance systems, hardened facilities. Like, you have to build a fortress before you can even pour the foundation.
Building a fortress for your project. Well, that brings us to the people involved, the human resource implications. The workforce is under immense pressure here.
Yeah, the impact on the workforce is immediate and profound.
How so?
Well, heightened tensions, they trigger urgent evacuations. Foreign engineers, project managers, skilled workers, they get pulled out of high-risk areas.
And then finding replacements.
Incredibly difficult and expensive. An industry recruitment firm survey found that after major escalations, project staffing vacancies in these high-risk zones can surge by 25–40% within weeks.
25 to 40% vacancy rate almost overnight.
Imagine your core team just vanishing.
Wow. And it's not just the expats leaving, is it?
No, not at all. Conflict severely disrupts local labor markets, too. It forces local workers to flee affected areas.
Creating shortages elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And overwhelming social services in the communities they flee to.
It's a ripple effect on people's lives.
Which forces us to ask a really important question. How do we genuinely support the people left on the ground?
Right.
Morale just plummets. And while physical safety is obviously paramount, the constant tension, the anxiety of living under threat, it takes a brutal psychological toll.
I can only imagine.
We're seeing firms significantly increase psychological support services now. Because how do you even focus on building when your workforce is constantly looking over their shoulder, stressed out?
Yeah, productivity must suffer hugely.
Absolutely. And this creates a long-term problem, too. Prolonged instability leads to what we call skill drain.
Meaning?
Talented local workers eventually emigrate. They leave for safer, more stable places. And that severely hinders the country's future domestic construction capacity. You lose your best people.
That's a really grim reality, which I guess brings us to our final point, and maybe the most critical one for the industry's future, the long-term industry outlook, adaptation and resilience.
Exactly. Because the long shadow of this conflict, it necessitates some fundamental shifts in how the construction industry operates globally.
What's the biggest shift?
I think the undeniable reality is a permanent risk premium. Geopolitical risk assessment, mitigation. It's not a temporary fix. It's becoming a core, ongoing cost of doing business everywhere.
Not just regionally, but globally.
Globally. Budgets absolutely have to reflect this new normal. If they don't, you simply won't survive in the long run.
So this pressure, it forces this massive supply chain reformation we touched on earlier.
It has to. It's costly, it's complex, but necessary.
We're talking about diversification.
Finding alternative suppliers far from conflict zones. Maybe sourcing steel from Brazil instead of Turkey, if risks spike there.
And nearshoring or reshoring.
Yep, bringing supply chains closer, making them shorter, more controllable within stable regions.
Plus that just-in-case idea, strategic stockpiling of critical materials.
But this also demands much better visibility, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Tech-enabled visibility, using things like AI and blockchain for real-time tracking of materials and predicting risks, turning an opaque system into something more transparent, like a shield.
Okay, so technology plays a bigger role.
And what's surprising, maybe, is that this pressure actually accelerates technological adoption.
Necessity being the mother of invention.
Precisely. Solutions that reduce reliance on vulnerable systems, or even human presence in hazardous zones, they're going to surge.
Like what?
Think modular or prefabrication. Building components in secure, stable factories minimizes that risky on-site time.
Makes sense.
Automation and robotics, reducing reliance on vulnerable human labor in dangerous areas.
Right.
And things like digital twins, remote monitoring, allowing projects to be managed effectively from much safer locations.
That makes perfect strategic sense. Are there other long-term shifts?
Well, we're likely to see greater regional fragmentation. Construction markets might become more isolated.
Requiring different strategies for different places.
Yeah, firms will need distinct strategies for stable versus high-risk regions. You can't use a one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
And the buildings themselves.
Resilient design. Infrastructure projects will increasingly incorporate security and redundancy features right from the outset. It becomes part of the initial plan, not an afterthought.
Built-in resilience.
Ultimately, the winners in this new landscape, I think, will be those companies who treat geopolitical risk as a core strategic variable.
Not just an afterthought or a line item to cut.
It's exactly. Agility, diversification, and really aggressive tech adoption. These are non-negotiables for navigating this new reality. It's no longer just about building strong structures.
It's about building strong, adaptable systems.
Precisely.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does all of this mean for you listening?
Well, the Iran-Israel conflict, it's clearly not just a headline.
More from it.
It's a powerful force actively reshaping the landscape of global civil construction, from sourcing a single bag of cement to the basic viability of multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects.
Ripple effects are profound.
Yeah. Supply chains are fragile. We've seen that. Sanctions create this labyrinthine compliance burden. Projects face physical and financial jeopardy. And the workforce, the people, are operating under immense pressure.
A tough environment.
So the industry has to build not just structures anymore, but systems. Systems capable of weathering these geopolitical storms.
The adaptation has to happen.
Because the cost of ignoring these tremors, it just seems too high. It really is.
Yeah.
And maybe zooming out for just a final thought, this raises an important question for you to consider.
Okay.
Beyond this immediate crisis, how might this kind of geopolitical volatility fundamentally redefine what stability even means for any long-term investment anywhere in the world over the next decade? Something to think about.
That's a powerful question. Food for thought indeed. Stay informed, everyone, and stay resilient. Thank you for diving deep with us today.